So we're into presentations and delegations. And thank you, Mr. Newcomb, for coming and talking to us again about bike safety improvements and sharing the road. Please do come forward. We welcome you to council.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was here a number of months ago. I guess it was your first sitting after you were elected or re-elected. And I remember talking to you about bike safety. I was hoping to make an impact. I know I made an impact on at least one of you because you came out to my car as I was getting in it and said, "Oh, thank you for bringing that up." Well, that was nice to hear. But the impact wasn't great enough because I don't think there's been much done or even considered. I was born in Canada, but raised down in the States. Lived in California, Los Angeles area actually, and then moved to Colorado, Arizona, and then when in my 30s I moved back to Vancouver. And all of these times when I was a young man, I rode quite a bit, bicycled. I was actually in a couple of races till I realized the only way to win a race is to endure pain, and so that didn't go very far. But all of these places, I never really felt any kind of danger or much danger or any fear. But that's not necessarily true here in Salmon Arm. I've reconnected with biking in the last 10 years that I've lived here and do a lot of it. I enjoy it. But I do have a lingering fear in the back of my head all the time about the danger I'm enduring here riding in Salmon Arm. And when I say danger, it's dangerous out there. There's Alberta drivers out there. And I don't know where these people come from, but they have no regard for bikes. They just go right by you. And that's one problem. Oh yeah, and I can say this because I'm a gray hair, there's the little old ladies. And they would rather not go over the yellow line but get close to a bicycle. I don't know, going on the yellow line is illegal. But that's scary. When somebody comes close to you within inches, you slow down, stop, and shiver, because I've had a few people come within inches of me. Now, the next thing is we have very narrow streets in Salmon Arm. I don't know if they just paved carriageways many years ago, but there's a lot of narrow streets here. You got 4 vehicles in a row, 2 of them parked and 2 of them going by each other, and you throw a bike in the mix and it's close. So that throws another factor in there. The third factor, which is something you can do about, or do something about, is bringing attention to the fact that there's bicycles on the road. And I'm not talking about spending a lot of money here. I'm just talking about bringing some awareness, even maybe passing a couple laws, like a 3-foot law. There's a number of cities in BC and across the country that have 3-foot laws. Doesn't cost a lot of money, but if the RCMP acted on it a few times, people will become aware, and that means 3 foot from any bicycle that's going down the road. Any closer than that, you're getting too close. Another thing you might consider is maybe starting to develop a plan for bringing bicycle awareness to the forefront. Because right now there's only 2 signs in this whole city that have anything to do with, well, excuse me, 3. There's one on, I just saw it today as a matter of fact, on 11th Avenue Northeast. There's a bike path. On the lakeshore, there's 2 that say, share the road. Well, that's a very narrow road. I think somebody is really pushing their luck if they go down that road on a bike, especially going east, because it's so narrow. And people are moving pretty good there, so that's scary. But it'd be nice if there was something more to bring attention to the fact that there's people on bicycles around. I noticed, Your Worship, you were at the bike event on Saturday on Hudson Avenue. So you're aware there's a few people riding bikes in this city.
It was fantastic.
Yep, and there's been a lot more that would like to be riding bikes, but I've talked to them and they're concerned. They don't want to, this is a scary place. And with this advent of electric bikes, that's even going to be more older people want to ride their bikes, which is good exercise and certainly healthy for them. So I would like to see awareness, something like the 3-foot law, something like a plan of action that you can develop that is actionable down the road, that this is what we're going to do and at such and such time limit. That's not going to cost a lot of money. Like I see that you're doing a lot of work on the boulevards and burying power lines and things like that cost a lot of money. How about something that may save a life? Because bringing awareness to bicycle people may save a life. And I would appreciate you thinking about it in this next season as you develop your budget for doing things for bicyclists. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Council, do you have any questions for Mr. Newcomb? Councillor Lindgren.
Does it have to be a question or can I make a comment?
You can make a comment as
Thank you. Thank you for coming to talk about this because I think it's something that's becoming more and more prevalent. And I've had a couple conversations with Art Borkent about, because he's very passionate about, they ride their bikes everywhere, and I agree, it's not safe. I've tried a number of times using my bike to get to work when I was up at the high school, and riding up past the health unit there is a nightmare. You get, I don't know, maybe 12 inches, and there's these little raised reflectors in the middle of the lane. It's impossible to ride safely there, so I ride on the sidewalks. And so what I floated to Art was that he invite council to come and bike Salmon Arm with him one day to show us what the most popular routes are and what we can do to improve them. And I've told him it needs to get done before July because it'll be too hot to ride uphill here then. So I'm hoping that he's going to act on that and set up some kind of tour for us so that we can see where the most prevalent areas are, where it's most dangerous, and where we can possibly do something that's going to improve that. So stay tuned.
Okay, well, thank you. And another thing, a number of years ago, I see about 3 years ago, there was a bike lane that was drawn on 11th Avenue Northeast, going by the police station there and on the way up to 2 schools. And you even had some stencils of bicyclists there. Well, that lasted until it faded, and that's it. I mean, why wasn't that continued? There's 2 schools up there that kids go up to and use their bikes to get there. So that's an obvious place to start. And 2 lines and a couple stencils isn't real expensive. So that might be something you want to start with right there.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Lindgren. I would take part in that biking with Art if he organizes it. Chad, or Councillor Lyson. Sorry.
I like bikes.
It's in your bio, I know that.
Yeah, I do. I enjoy them.
Councillor Lyson, did you have a question?
Yeah. Just for staff, I was going to ask about the line painting because I've harassed them a little bit about it. But if they have any idea when the contractors might be here, and if it's staff that actually paints in the bike line stencils. You're not the first person to present to us on the biking and the shared pathway lane, shared roadways.
Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Your Worship, the sharrows that are painted on 11th were done by staff, and so they'll be repainted this year.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And I agree with you, and thank you for your presentation. Transportation's changing, and how we get to and fro is always changing. Self-driving cars, electric vehicles, e-bikes. E-bikes are what will make bike to work possible in our city with these hills. Because anybody can bike to work. It's biking home from work that's the problem. Especially for Councillor Flynn, because he lives up a hill and I don't know if he can ride up those yet without an e-bike. But you get one, bud. You get there. So climate change is happening. Our winters are more mild. Sometimes we get 6 weeks of real February like we did this year. But how we develop our transportation plans and how we adapt to climate change, especially with the advances in technology for two-wheel, transportation, battery-assisted, electric-assisted bikes will be something that we'll have to consider. And we've done a really good job of supporting trails, and I think we need to look at shared roadways for cycling as part of our future development. So thanks so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Councillor Walsh-Richmond, I'll give you the last word.
Thanks, Your Worship. Appreciate the presentation. I too like bicycles. I think we all do. And I just thought it might be an opportunity to talk about process. So whose bucket would this fall into? It certainly isn't just the city of Salmon Arm, but there's also the regional district, the province, and I wonder if we could hear briefly from staff about where these types of decisions are made and handled, and also a reminder that next week is in fact Bike to Work Week.
Okay. Councillor Walsh-Richmond, so your question to staff is?
Well, we have a Greenways committee, we have, you know, so where would these conversations happen? And perhaps the presenter is looking to make a contribution to this. There's also those opportunities.
Sure. So is there a city committee that would take this on? I think Councillor Lavery might have an answer to that. Can I pass it to Councillor Lavery?
Yes, thank you, Mayor
Okay.
Harrison. Thanks for the presentation, too. It's in the terms of reference to look at active transportation within the Greenways Committee. I think that would fall within ours. Much as most of us have new committees, I'm relatively new on that. I think we've had 2 or 3 meetings. We have just started the idea of what could an active transportation strategy look like. I want to be really direct here right now. It's long-term thinking. The challenges that you've mentioned about narrow roads in the key spots where most people, along 11th, where most people are traveling is a real conundrum. But we need to have that where, I think it'll be in the fall when we start that discussion. The province has announced an active transportation strategy that they're going to bring out, but we will not know that until June, July sometime. So it's lining up here now. So I think that the long-range, high-level approach to give us some guidance, because we're good when we have a plan to move forward, and you're calling for actionable stuff is the way to go. We're going to be a little ways away from that, and I think until then, fresh paint and due diligence is going to be there. I wish, for me, the answer would be different. But I would suggest that it's within the purview of the Greenways Commission and committee, and that we're going to maintain the very active progress on trails that we've had so far, and we're talking about shifting it to active transportation.
I would be more than happy to be involved in anything that you guys come up with. If you need anybody from the public, hey, I'm here.
Thank you very much for the offer, and perhaps the Greenways will invite you to come and speak to them.
That would be nice.
Could I also ask you, I know you wrote a letter last year that we could refer to our budget committee just so that when the time comes, we have that piece of paper. That will be helpful if you just address even an email to mayor and council. Okay, thank you very much, and we appreciate you coming and reminding us.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Your Worship.
Councillor Lavery, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I would just note that there actually has been a public call for a member at Citizen at Large to sit on the Greenways Committee, and I believe that would closes in about a week. So I think if you talk to staff about that, if you're interested in a more formalized role within that, that could be a possibility as well. So I just urge you to talk to staff. Staff.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Lavery. So thank you to Lana Fitt, our Economic Development Officer, who has said that she wouldn't mind bumping back her presentation because Melissa and Aidan have an airplane they have to catch, and we know that their presentation is probably going to take between 30 and 40 minutes. So I'm thinking probably until 4:45. So appreciate, Lana, your patience there. But I would call forward Darby, Melissa, and Aidan, HCMA Architecture and Design. Oh, Dale, yes.
Your Worship, members of council, thanks for putting this on the agenda. I'll just do a small presentation of Melissa and Aidan. Back in 2012, we did the Recreation Master Plan, which certainly shed some light on the deficiency of our current facility. Dating back to 2015, through the process of trying to shoehorn various programs and users into the Recreation Center, it became obvious that the demands on the facility were becoming so difficult that accessibility for the public was significantly being affected. From my experience with planning and construction of the Shaw Center, I was aware of the significant timelines between planning and actual construction with such intricate facilities. Initial subtle consultation with our board, city staff, and the council of the day were able to raise the profile of planning a new facility. Traction began with the city's successful acquisition of the adjacent Minos property. The next step was funding to provide a study, and through a chance meeting with Melissa Higgs in 2016, we were able to establish criteria and budget for researching the needs of the community. In 2018, Council provided the funding for the Recreation Campus redevelopment, and through an extensive procurement process, the firm of HCMA Architecture and Design won the bid to provide the services for a comprehensive process of public engagement, planning, and design. As I'm sure everyone is aware, the project culminated in a decision over 2 possible design options, and today we have the final report from our consultants, Melissa Higgs, who's principal with the firm, and her associate, Aidan Collison. Throughout the process, I've been impressed with their ability to take the existing facility and information from the community and find a solution which will meet the majority of the needs for the community and the surrounding area.
Thank you very much, Dale, and appreciate your leadership in making this happen, and also the Recreation Society and the board. And I've been a part of following along and really appreciate the work that you've done.
Thank you.
Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you. Can you guys all hear me? I've got the mic set up properly. Great. So thank you very much in advance for the time. I know I'm going a little bit beyond what's allowed, but I think there's a lot of great information, and quite honestly, I thought it was necessary for decision making. So we've going to be here today with the primary objective of informing you of the scope of the work. So what we were tasked to do and how we went about doing it. We're going to, as Dale mentioned, kind of present the proposed concept designs. And we're looking for, if not approval, at least direction for the Recreation Society so they understand how to move forward with the project. I always like to have a roadmap, especially if I'm going to have a half an hour of somebody talking to me. So this is roughly how we're going to go through the information today. So again, we'll talk a little bit about what we were asked to do, introduce you to the team who supported us in the work. Item number 2 is defining need. So it's looking at an understanding of what the conditions of the existing building were and what we had to work with, combined simultaneously with quite a robust round of engagement to try and find out what the community's aspirations were for a future facility. The next round is looking at space needs. So once we kind of do that first round, how do we translate that into the types of spaces that would support a new facility? And then next step number 4 is kind of looking at a very high level at those 2 concept designs that we went out to the public with. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what we heard and the feedback we got from the public in our second round of engagement and how that informed the concepts that we're going to talk about today. And then hopefully there'll be some time for discussion and questions. So in simple terms, the ask for us as a team was understanding that the Saskew Center was kind of at the end of its, potentially at the end of its life. It's an aging facility. It also is potentially not meeting the kind of aspirations and the needs of the community as it grows, was to look at possible ways that we could think of a future facility, looking at specifically aquatics, recreation uses, and performing arts. And I would say some of the key things that kind of informed how we went about the work was first understanding the existing site and the context, how much space we have, how it should relate to the other pieces of the puzzle on the recreation site. Of course, talking to the community, as I said, understanding what their aspirations were for a replacement facility or a new revised facility. And then we combine that with an understanding of, we want this proposal to meet the needs of the community 25 years plus. So what does the future demographic and growth look like, as well as what we understand to be kind of broad trends in recreation, aquatics, and performing arts at a community scale to inform the work. And then, again, really just digging into what do we have left in the existing building, how much of it's viable for reuse. And I think the kind of underlying message from the working group was how do we figure out how to maximize what you already have and kind of use it to meet the future needs for your community. So again, these are the kind of 4, I would say, chapters of the way we approach the work. So I'm going to set up my presentation based on these. But we started about a year ago, so June of last year was when we began the project. as Dale introduced, so I'm with HCMA. I'm an architect and a principal, as is my colleague Aiden. And we had the good fortune of getting out and meeting with some of you in your community, but the people who did a lot of behind the scenes work that you didn't get to meet were Morris and Hirschfield. So they did a lot of the building envelope review for the building condition assessment review and some energy modeling. And then we have a quantity surveyor who's been helping us with costing along the way, Ross Templeton and Associates. So if we kind of dig into this first round of work on the existing building conditions, we began that in June. And our ask for Morris and Hirschfield was really to, get into that existing facility, open up access hatches, get up onto the roof, talk to the operations people with boots on the ground, and really figure out what was working, what might need to be replaced in the near future. And we asked them to look at broad categories: structural, mechanical, electrical, and we asked them to give us upgrades, so an understanding of what needed to be done and how much it would cost. And I would say we found out fairly early on in our work that the existing building actually had quite a lot of life remaining in it. So it has been well maintained, and it has a lot of opportunity for repurposing. So that kind of really guided the proposals and the work that we did moving forward. But kind of beyond that, we said, okay, well, what is it that actually needs to be addressed? And the total recommendations for upgrades and investment in the building was about $4.2 million, and you can see kind of the bulk of that cost is around mechanical, so upgrades to the air handling units, to the domestic water system. I think sprinkler systems was a fairly big ticket item as well. And the next was the structural, so some upgrades to some of the steel that's been corroding in the pool environment, and then to a lesser extent some electrical upgrades. And then again, to help with decision making, we said, okay, well, if it's $4.2 million, how much of this is a priority that needs to be done in the next 5 years, so we can kind of help with it from that perspective. And we heard back that actually the bulk of the recommendations were things they recommended to be done in the first 5 years. So it's kind of a $3.2 million spend that would be needed just to keep the building operating in its current state. And then about $1 million of that was stuff that could be, discretionary and happening outside that 5-year window. So that kind of informs the kind of investment that's required if nothing else goes forward on the building, just to keep it operational. And then again, simultaneously, while Morris and Hirschfield was doing that work, we were really digging in to meet with your community. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we went about that round of engagement, so who we engaged with and how we engaged with them. And I will say it was quite a joy meeting with your community. It was we do quite a bit of public engagement, and it was quite honestly enjoyable at all phases with Salmon Arm. So that was good for us. So we met with about 12 different stakeholders, over 75 people total in the kind of the early stages. So we met with the key swim clubs for the pool. We met with Aquafit users. We met with kind of the 2 key stakeholder groups for arts and culture. We met with Rotary Club, and again, really interesting conversations and feedback there. We ran an online public survey where we got over 2,100 responses. And just to put that into context, for a community the size of Salmon Arm, that's a really great response rate. It's between 10 and 15% of the population responding, so we can feel kind of good about those numbers. Some of the other ways we reached out to people was we did an ideas fair, so think of that kind of like a very engaged and active open house. We did that in August at Wednesdays on the Wharf, and we talked to about 200 people at that event. And then we had a pop-up, which is similar material to the ideas fair, but it's not advertised in advance. We just kind of show up where we think people are going to be, and that was at the Salmon Arm Fall Fair, where we talked to just over 300 people. There's an image of us at the boards we had at Wednesdays on the Wharf. And then I thought I would touch really briefly on kind of how we engaged with people at those 2 events. So again, aquatics, recreation, performing arts were kind of the key scopes we were asked to look at in terms of spaces and uses. So these 3 boards are really looking at asking the community, like, what is it that you would like to see in a future facility in these categories? And we kind of populated it with some images that might inspire conversation, but we mostly asked people to fill in those kind of blank boxes with Post-it notes to tell us what they would like to see in the facility. And then at the same time, we had in those same categories of uses, we asked people to prioritize the way they would like to use those spaces. So basically you got a 6 sticky dots, and you could kind of vote to determine what your priority was for aquatics and recreation and performing arts. And again, that's less about specific space types and more about what would draw you to a facility. And then I would just say before I go into this that what was critical for us in the engagement was to make sure that we were asking similar questions for the stakeholder engagements, for the pop-up events, and at the surveys, so that we were kind of able to collect a common theme of our responses. So we talked to 50% of the people who we engaged with were between 20 and 48. 20% were older, 49 to 64. 30% were kind of at the other ends of those spectrums, so below 19 or over 64. 75% of the people that we heard from were from Salmon Arm, and 25% came from surrounding communities. And then the really exciting part is, what did we hear from people about what they wanted in their future facility? And again, I would say that I think one of the common measures of success for engagement is how many people did you engage with, but another way of looking at it is, did you get consistency across all the different ways that you engage with people? And I'm kind of happy to report that for this engagement, we did hear very similar feedback at all the different forums, so stakeholders as well as public engagement. And what we've done here is summarize the kind of 3 highest level priorities that we heard from all those engagement events. And they are ordered in terms of priorities that we heard. So the very first priority we heard was that the community would like enhanced leisure pool facilities. So specifically, we heard asks for a lazy river, for slides, for perhaps a wave pool or a climbing wall. And then the second priority you heard from people was the need to increase the capacity around the lane swimming, and the idea that you could potentially be programming multiple things at the same time. So could we have aquafit and lane swimming? So it's really talking about, I think, capacity for that recreational usage. And then the third priority we heard from the community was that there was a desire to enhance and invest in performing arts. So we heard music was one of the highest priorities, but also dance and theater and comedy were of interest. And then beyond the specific ask for spaces, we heard, we asked people in general what their priorities were, and we heard some really great things. I think the first one, the idea of bigger, is just an indicator, again, that your community has grown over time since the facility was first built, and there's a lot of desire to get more access to not just the water, but also the recreation and that recreational kind of arts and gym space. We heard, well, I love to hear this, that your community would really like an inclusive and an accessible facility, so inclusive for all age groups, and accessible not just in terms of physical access, but how can there be ways to find financial accessibility for your community? And then a recurring message around flexibility. How can we design this looking to the future to accommodate a range of uses that might be able to change and grow with the community? And I think modern is a hard one to categorize, but I think probably people are going to newer facilities and getting an expectation that that they would like something that's a bit newer. So modern, we've captured it there. And then lastly, we have open-ended questions, and I like to put these in sometimes because when people make a point of writing something down, instead of just checking a box, it usually carries a bit of extra weight. And these are kind of comments that we felt reflected general themes we were seeing. So the first one here is around the idea for a fun center for families as a priority. And the majority of taxpayers will only be using the pool for recreation. And then the second point, the idea of having different activities happening at the same time, so maybe a multiplex or more things that draw people to use the facility at the same time. Bigger pool, I think, is just that comment on capacity. And then finally, a facility suited to all users, young and old, and is accessible to all. And I just wanted to include this slide. We showed this at the second round of engagement, those kind of sticky dots where we showed how people to prioritize in the aquatics category. This is kind of what that looked like, that number 1, the priority for people was swimming for fun. 2 is around swimming lessons and development of skills, and you can kind of see it tracking through all the way to the other categories as well. So while we had the opportunity to talk to your community, we asked them what the barriers about the current facility were. So if you didn't go, why didn't you go? And in terms of aquatic and recreation, what we heard was that from 50% of people stated that the operating hours were a constraint for them or a barrier. 50% said that the lack of a leisure pool was a reason for not going to the existing facility. 25% stated lack of lane swimming capacity, 20% pool temperature, and then finally 20% noted that the lack of a fitness or training space prevented them from going. And I would say maybe those 3 comments in the middle there are quite interrelated. So the idea of pool temperature relates to not having a leisure pool, and potentially that kind of pressure on the lane swimming is related to the fact that there is nothing else to do within the facility, really, if you can't get into that to the lane pool. So it's needing to look at those things together and independently as well. And then when we asked the same question for barriers of usage for performing arts, this is what we heard. 50% stated inadequate performance seating, 40% noted that the acoustics weren't appropriate, and 30% felt there was a lack of capacity, so perhaps maybe related to seating, but that the space wasn't sufficient. Inadequate sight lines was 20%, and then 20% around poor lighting. And I would say from having been in that space, I think the challenge is that the original facility was purpose designed for performing arts. And then over time, I think there were some decisions maybe not to put the seating in, so that it feels a little bit like it's in between a recreational gym and a performing arts space, and perhaps it's not doing either one of those things really well. And it does have a lot of demand on it, so I think that's informing some of that feedback. Okay, so having understood what the building condition is and what we've heard from the public in terms of what they want, we do what we describe as space needs, so determining what the actual program spaces might be to support usage in the future. And so I want to describe that here in almost like buckets of usage. So we know that we're looking at aquatics and we're looking at recreation and performing arts. And the way that we inform kind of a space list for those usages, for all three of those, would be looking at what is the community telling us that they really want to see in the future. We're kind of balancing that with an understanding of budget. And so that's part of that prioritization exercise. So we can't always have everything. How do we use budget to kind of focus the priorities for the community? And then you'll see under aquatic components, there's another category, which is demand analysis. I don't have a lot of time to get into that right now, but I will say that because the aquatic component is typically one of the more expensive capital costs that a municipality will undertake, and then tends to be operationally an expensive component, there's a lot of work that is done to make sure that you're kind of right-sizing your aquatic. It's not something that you want to overbuild. And so we did a lot of work to figure out, again, what your future growth looks like, what demographic trends are to help inform the scale, particularly for the aquatic, and that's around best practices that have been established for the aquatic uses. So then at the beginning, we kind of look at almost what we call a menu exercise. It's almost like a buffet of based on what we heard from the public for Salmon Arm, there's a range of ways that we can look at the spaces that could support the needs and the aspirations. So if we maybe start on I guess it's the left-hand scale underneath aquatics, there's kind of a long bar, and that's what we generally consider the base requirements for the pool. So we know there's going to be a lobby space, there's going to be staff support spaces, there's going to be mechanical, there's going to be a change room, there's going to be a leisure and hot pool component we know that will be kind of custom designed to suit, and there's going to be sauna and steam. And so there's some decision making around there, but we kind of consider those the base components. And then there's the kind of what we call the main tanks. When we get to those lane swimming pools, starting at 25-meter lane, 6-lane pool, going all the way up to a 6-meter 10-lane pool with bulkheads would be the kind of the bigger end. And then the next kind of range of categories for aquatics are what are the additional amenities you want to include, like a slide, or in this case maybe diving boards. And then we do a similar exercise with recreation and performing arts. So you can see we heard from people that there's a lot of demand for a gym space. Potentially the addition of multi-purpose spaces, childcare maybe, and then you can see performing arts is really around the scale of the space and whether there might be some additional supporting spaces. And so with some refinement and some work in with our working group, this is what we came up with as our kind of target series of spaces to begin doing a test fit and concept design for the first round of concept design. So we started with a 6-lane, 25-meter pool, the water slide, the idea of bringing diving back in and having a pool that would suit that. We looked at a single gymnasium, keeping the racquetball courts, adding some multi-purpose rooms, and there was some desire for that fitness space, so we've included that as well. And then under performing arts, we really looked at, from the building conditions assessment, the space was originally designed to have a capacity of about 300 seats, so without rebuilding that and expanding it, that's kind of what informed the direction moving forward on performing arts. So this next section is looking at as Dale said, we went to the public with 2 concept designs. We actually had, I would say, between 9 and 12 different versions, and again, we refined that with the working group, and we came up with 2 we went to the public with. And I just want to try to define concept design at this stage here. So it's really almost like a sketch. It's a design idea, but it's not architecture yet. It's just looking at trying to combine what we understand to be those big space needs, what the community wants, and what we can fit on the site. So it's not yet an architectural design. It's kind of an idea that contains all of those things and can inform the direction moving forward. So the first of the concept designs we called option A, and what it really is a renovation and an expansion to the existing pool. So the kind of black box you're seeing on the screen now is the existing pool space, and in this option we looked at coming in and renovating that existing space, bringing some things up to standard, putting a multi-purpose room on the deck, upgrading the change rooms, and then coming along and adding a whole new component that takes on the leisure and the universal change room that we heard from in the slide. So you can see in here we've proposed embedding lane swimming inside that leisure pool. So you'll see that in both of the options, but it's the idea of taking some of the capacity and the demand off of the 6-lane pool and bringing it into the kind of the warmer water and having a shallower option there that provides some flexibility of programming. So the price tag for that came in at about just over 21 million. And then in this scheme, we proposed in a second phase to come along and add a brand new multi-purpose gymnasium behind the existing facility. And the cost there came in at about just under 6.5 million. And then in the phase 3 of this scheme, we looked at kind of reinvesting specifically in that original performing arts space, taking out the stage, removing some things that were not appropriate for performing arts and bringing it up with highly flexible seating, bringing in new lighting, a new sound system, and making it really dedicated for community scale performing arts. And then in phase 4, we proposed the idea of potentially adding the fitness space behind the performing arts. And I will say that one of the key differentiators for option A versus what we're going to show next as option B was that there would be quite an impact to the existing pool. So the kind of renovation component would require a shutdown of that existing pool. But the total of this option A came in at just under 36 million project cost. And then option B, which we called the new pool idea, started with a brand new purpose-built pool, so same program area as the previous option, but just a new build that allowed the existing pool to operate while this one was being constructed. And it included the fitness center in that first phase because we see best practices really wanting to combine the fitness center and the aquatic center together. And so you can see a bit of a difference, a jump in the price tag there of about $12 million more for about 36 million for that first phase. And then in this scheme, we go back and we repurpose the existing pool and we turn it into the multi-purpose gymnasium and a series of multi-purpose spaces for $5.5 million for that phase. And then exactly the same phase 3 for this one is going back in and repurposing that performing arts space. And we see the price tag for this one coming in at just under $47.5 million. So at the same time, we were asked to do some energy modeling. So we asked Morrison Hershfield of those two new options, could they come in, make some basic assumptions, because of course the building isn't designed yet, but around best practices for the performance of the wall and the roof, and assume assumptions around the glazing ratios. And I think the big change really here is assuming that the mechanical systems are really upgraded and are performing in a much more energy efficient way. And what does that look like in terms of energy costs? So this chart, there's a very big report on this, but I'm kind of highlighting here. If you look at the top, the number, that's got the red box around it, the existing energy costs are about $115,000 annually. And if we jump down to option B, just because it's slightly more extreme, it's bringing those costs up to $135,000 annually. But you can see that the area, the floor area of the facility is almost doubling from that existing to option B. And I would say it's not just that the area is bigger, the intensification of the usage in terms of the number of people and the types of things you can do in that space has changed significantly. So it's a pretty good value from an energy perspective. So I think at this stage it was just testing out that there was going to be some benefits operationally to the new facility. And then we were also asked to take a look at what would it mean if we were to put photovoltaics on the roof of either option A or option B. And Morrison Hershfield did that kind of high-level testing and said they saw potential for around 30 to 35% additional savings in the future with photovoltaics if you chose to go that route. So that's the end of that those two concept options, and we went out to the public with those two options A and B, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what we heard on February 10th when we had our open house here. There's an image of a lot of boards because there was a lot of information we wanted to give back to the public. So primarily, what did we hear from you? How did that information that we heard inform the concept designs? And then what we asked people to do on these feedback forums was just kind of tell us how they felt about option A versus option B. And there was an open space on the back of the form to tell us in more detail if they had written comments they wanted to share. So we estimated we had almost 500 people at the open house, and we received 284 feedback forms. And I'm pleased to say in terms of consistency that we heard quite resoundingly that 80% of people preferred option B over option A. A real significant reason cited was the idea that there was no downtime on the pool, which was really important to your community. I think there's also the desire for the kind of from scratch new pool that interested people as well. One of the other key things we heard after that open house and at that open house was that for a lot of the swim clubs, the 6 lanes wasn't going to be sufficient to meet their aspirations. So while it might have met demand analysis from a day-to-day usage perspective into the future, it limited their ability to host certain events and to kind of really maximize and grow their training aspirations. So we heard feedback that 8 lanes would be much better over the 6 lanes that were proposed originally. And again, just reiterating that the public was not happy about the idea that the pool could be closed at any time during the retrofit or the expansion. The other key information we heard was around the performing arts component. And this was kind of an interesting one because you could see that in that first round of engagement, there was quite a high level of community support in some way for performing arts. But at the open house event, when we presented the concept that we showed you, there wasn't necessarily enough support from local arts stakeholders. So the feedback that we heard specifically was that perhaps it just wasn't big enough, 300 seats wasn't sufficient to accommodate their hopes. And then we also heard quite a bit around location. So is this the right location for the performing arts space? So what I've got here is just, I know that there's a cultural master plan that's being undertaken right now, and I think that the performing arts component, we've left it, we're going to show 2 different streams here that we could, I think there's quite a lot of flexibility about that space and how it could be reimagined, but I think we're looking for direction here today, because I think it's part of what needs to be done in your master plan to kind of dig a little bit more within the community, maybe look at that idea of capacity and location. So I'll show you 2 different schemes today that incorporate, one of which incorporates performing arts. So we're at the part where I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about what we've proposed in that final facility. So again, if we go back to that menu item, you can see under the aquatic components, we've switched from the 6 lane down to a slightly larger pool at 8 lanes. And then we're going to kind of show you 2 options that look at whether you invest more fully in performing arts in this space, or perhaps look at spending a little bit less, but turning that multipurpose space into a second gym. So the final concept is really an expansion of option B, of course, because that's what we heard support for. And I'm going to walk through again at just a high level before I go through more detail. The price tag has gone up a little bit here in that phase 1 pool because we've added those 2 additional lanes, which was about, at a high level, about $2 million additional. We're showing that repurposing of the natatorium as we showed in phase B. And then we're going to show 2 different options here. The first one in phase 3 proposes investing a little bit more to repurpose that into a recreation-focused gymnasium for a total of just over 45 million. And then we're going to talk a little bit about if we looked at phase 3 and we went back to the idea of reinvesting that to bring it into a performing arts space. And the price tag then goes up a little bit more for that. So I'm going to just walk through the spaces that are shown in this concept design. I think the first, slow to click. First point here is that because we're doing the new pool adjacent to the existing, the idea that we can keep that pool operational and have, I would think, a very tiny or short period of downtime when there's a move-in phase, but for the most part, we can keep the pool operating for the community the whole time. And again, just to be clear, the white box on the screen is your existing facility. So, sorry, I clipped a bit fast there. So the kind of circle that we're showing here is just, we're going to kind of go through some of these spaces and show images to kind of get a sense of what we're proposing. This is actually a 6-lane pool, but part of the reason we wanted to include it in here was you can see along the side there's an accessible ramp to provide access into the lane pool, which is being proposed as part of the 8-lane pool for this project. And then just the idea of bringing back the 1 meter and the 3 meter. I know there's a depth issue with the current pool, so kind of purpose building to bring that into the facility. And then here in the middle, we have a hot pool, which we often call a family hot pool or a kind of a universal hot pool. So what we're seeing in a lot of new facilities is a really large community-scaled hot pool, which we're proposing here. And I should also say that that also has you can see along the side there, full accessibility, which I think is one of the challenges with your current hot pool. And the next 2 circles are looking at that leisure pool and the slide. So people had asked for the lazy river. Here's an example of kind of what that lazy river might look like, and the slide in the background. And then just, I don't know if there's a light on this or a pointer on this. I'll try and... Actually, just right where you're standing, just right there up a little bit, there's the change facility. So we heard that ask for universal change rooms. This is a good image that for people who haven't been to a universal change room, just suggests the idea that the lockers come right onto the pool deck and there's visibility all the way through from the pool, through the change rooms, potentially even to the outside. And then in this slide, we're looking at, again, the idea of a slide, but where you can also see in the leisure pool for this facility, there's actually 15 meters lanes incorporated. So again, that sometimes they do aquafit in that lane, and sometimes they dedicate it for lane swimming. Sometimes it's just wide open for a leisure pool. So it's just an example of how that could be incorporated into the design. And then this is kind of, again, looking at that universal change room idea. This is actually looking at a universal change room at Hillcrest in Vancouver, showing it from the other side. So the idea that you can bring natural light right in all the way through that change facility for kind of eyes on that space and a feeling of safety and brightness. This is a similar kind of change facility in a facility in Surrey. And then we also heard through a lot of the engagement that there was a really strong desire to have an improved viewing space within the pool. So that idea of creating space both on the pool deck but also outside for people to kind of see that activity happening within the pool. This is like getting up into that upper level where the fitness is overlooking the pool, which we see as kind of a great way of tying together the fitness related to the pool as well as the kind of equipment that you might see in a fitness center. And then we also heard that for some of the competition hosting, it would be really great to try to arrange the lane pool on the site so that there could be an openness to the indoors, outdoors, and when they were hosting events, they could have kind of set up and staging for their events. And then, so that's kind of walking through the pool area. Now we're kind of getting into what that repurposing of the natatorium could look like. So the proposal there is a multi-purpose gymnasium. And this is a prompt to just note that the existing structural, the underside dimension of the existing natatorium will limit competition levels of some sports. Like volleyball would be an example where a slightly higher underside structure would be required, but I would say recreationally you could still have a huge range of activities happening in the gym, but there is a limitation there on the structural height. And then given the footprint of that existing auditorium, there's the opportunity to kind of layer a number of multi-purpose spaces off of kind of the central circulation spine beside that gymnasium. So there's some examples here. They could be slightly more fitness focused. They could be more multi-purpose in terms of children's programming or arts programming. And then in this first option, looking at how we could reuse this space back into a multi-purpose gym, we've used this as an example because if I flip back to the original slide here, you can see there's a circulation spine we'll look at in a minute here. And so one of the opportunities, if you decided to commit to making this a recreational gymnasium, would be to think about maybe opening up some of that gym so that the activity in that space can kind of spill into and be overlapping with the views into the multi-purpose spaces. And then in the other option, I just wanted to review how this space could be repurposed in terms of performing arts. And so, as I said in the beginning, it was originally designed for performing arts, so it's actually, to the inch designed for that purpose. And we've did a project in New Westminster called the Anvil Centre, which is literally the exact same proportion as a new build for community-focused performing arts. And here's a couple of examples of how the flexibility of the seating can be arranged in different ways. So this is looking at kind of a theater in the round idea with the seating. Another way that it can be configured to rake seating with a front stage. And then the idea that the seating can actually be pushed off to the side completely so you can have access to that full space and then take on some of the community events that I know the space is currently hosting, like banquets and end of the year festivities. So again, I think within that box that you're going to keep, you have some options as to how to use it, and it's probably going to evolve a little bit more clearly through your cultural master plan. So last space here is the idea of kind of what we sometimes call the social spine, or the glue that holds all these bits and pieces together. This is an example of, again, of Hillcrest in Vancouver, where you can see on the one side there's an ice rink, on the other side is the pool, and there's this kind of central access and gathering space. And this is actually a terrible photo because there's almost nobody in it, and normally you can barely walk through this space. It's a bit too tight, actually. And then one of the things that's interesting about this site is the grade drops almost a full story. So where we're proposing to put the pool is actually one story below where those existing facilities are, which I think actually is a great opportunity. So this is kind of looking at a central spine that is double height. So this is in a high school that we did in Prince George, actually, that is kind of the central heart for this school. But we think there's a really great opportunity to kind of take advantage of that grade change. And I think there's one more slide here. I'll go back. So this is the idea of kind of tiered seating that kind of looks into that pool space. So, but if you look here, I don't know if Councillor, you could do this again. The kind of gray,
You want to be right here, right?
basically, yeah. But if you come in at that where that first arrow is, you're at the level of the existing pool, and you can access the fitness on the upper level, and you can access up potentially seating that overlooks this double height lobby that is down in the pool. But you have this opportunity to kind of come in, look right down into the pool, and look right through potentially to a lake view, because this is oriented towards some of your really nice views from this site. Again, it's not an architectural design, it's just a design concept, but that's some of the things we were thinking about. And I'm not sure how my timing is, but that's everything I had to present, so I would love to answer questions and hear your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and you really powered through that.
That's too
So
fast,
take a pause. Thank you so much. We'll open it up for questions or comments from council. Councillor Eliason.
Yeah, thanks so much for your presentation. We had the opportunity, a few of us, to tour the Penticton facility last week, or was that last week? Recently. 2 weeks ago. Time flies when you're having fun. And they had the 10 by 10, and we toured the universal change rooms and saw their spine and saw all of their things, and so really opened our eyes to the recreation side rather than the length side. But they also had a theater in there, and they had the other rooms in the fitness center, and of course they're right by the arena and the other arena. So it was similar, but it was also 10 years older. Mm-hmm. The feedback we got was that the recreation side was the main sort of attraction for the community, which is the lazy pool and
the leisure, the warmer water, shallower.
The leisure, yeah.
Yeah, that's very common.
And they encouraged us greatly to go with the universal change rooms and to expand that, because that is the way of the future. So the one thing that I'm a little disappointed in is the maybe not the recommendation or the firm recommendation for the Performing Arts Center. And I've seen this, and was there just a lack of input, or just that's not good enough for us?
It's a tricky question. Dale, do you want me to do my best on this one? I mean, I'm happy to. You want?
Yeah, it's really, I'll get right to it, the tough ones.
Yeah, no, it's a good.
I think that we're seeing some kind of bounce back on that original take. Originally, the performing arts, there's a group that's done a lot of work on promoting a downtown location and a certain size, and when they looked at this, they thought that maybe we could do more with what we had, and they were kind of reluctant to support it. We've met with those groups now. There seems to be some
more cooperation
to take that stand. They feel that one of the key words that I would use was achievable, because we have the structure and the base to go on with this for 5.5 million and have something that not necessarily works for these groups, but would work for the community.
Yeah.
The theater group came back wholeheartedly supporting this subsequently, and they understand that it would work for the community, but it doesn't work for them. But they acknowledge that. So there's been some reluctance to have that firm stand, and we just felt that when we were looking at it, there was no point in us building something that there wasn't buy-in from the public. So, but we've done all the groundwork to see what that part of the facility can do. Mm-hmm. So, given the timelines, there's lots of time to change our mind. In the final report, we've addressed that. So, Melissa, you could maybe talk more to that.
Yeah, I would say from our perspective, there's something really compelling about taking something that was ideally designed for performing arts and turning it back to performing arts. I think to Dale's point, it may suit the needs of the community, but if there isn't a champion perhaps in the performing arts space who wants to kind of take it on, you're perhaps in an awkward spot. But I would think that, and I'm not sure if there is engagement that's happening as part of the cultural master plan, but it would seem like an opportunity to kind of test whether it's I felt that there was support at the public level and perhaps not for some of the key stakeholders.
Well,
Who
yeah.
might-
Yeah, no, I that's why I asked the question, because when was the facility built? In the early 1980s? So 35 years ago? So Salmon Arm gets a shot at a performing arts center every 35 to 40 years. If they don't, if there's not a compromise reached on a performing arts center or performing arts theater there, that won't come around for another 40 years. And that's the hard truth on it. So if it's decided that that doesn't work, this was originally built to be that, and they're like, yeah, when we get some money, we'll fix it up and we'll make it happen, but we'll build it right now, and we'll just turn it into this room. If that doesn't happen this time around, then it'll be a really long time before Salmon Arm gets one. So I really hope that there is compromise and there is community support that rallies around it, because I'd really like to see it there. But this is the one shot to get it, because they're expensive to build, and really expensive if you have to build an entirely new building and you can't retrofit one to that. But other than that, I think that this has been a really excellent presentation and a really excellent process, and very educational for us and for the people who are involved. So those were my only questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elias. And Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you I have a couple questions. Through you I have a couple questions. You mentioned 4.2 million, of which half was mechanical, and 3.2 had to be spent in the next 5 years. Does that money have to be spent if the plan is to replace this building by 2027? Would we patchwork, or would we have to move the date forward in order to avoid spending that? And I guess I make it somewhat analogous to how much we were going to have to spend to keep CP Rail and Transport Canada happy, and we're saving that by putting in an underpass. I am hoping we don't have to spend that 4.2 and then all of this money, and that there's going to be, I mean, it's great to hear it's got life left in it, and it sounds like everything can be repurposed, but I'm hoping we don't have to spend that and all this.
Yeah, I would say Morrison Hirschfield, when you hire them as a consultant, is going to be as conservative as possible. So in their view, it'd be really great if I think it's like going to a mechanic and you take your car in and you say, well, how much longer are the brakes going to, and there's a range, and I would say Morrison Hirschfield quite reasonably is being as conservative as possible. So I think the difference, if I'm trying to do the math here, did you say, what was your number, 2027? Mm-hmm. So
2027 is when it's in our long-term financial
plan. So stretching it 8 years. I'm not a mechanical expert, and I have a hard time answering it. As a professional, I would think you could expand the life beyond 5 years. So I can't imagine that you need to spend, I would consider the 4.2 as an investment in the overall project, and that you could hold off on that and invest it in, it would make no sense to buy new air handling units for an old facility and then turn around later and buy. I think it's something that you should keep an eye on, and perhaps the operators of the facility would have some insights on that too.
Okay, and one of the things I did want to comment on and agree with Councillor Eliason, and having been involved in this process kind of from the start, you guys have done an excellent job. I just think it's been really well put together, and the community's done an excellent job, because as you said, our number of respondents, 2,200, and I'm a little disappointed there's only 284 filled out feedback forms, but that's a different process, and the fact that 80% agreed on that, I can't imagine sitting here if it was 50-50 and going, okay, now what do we do?
Yeah, so. I mean, the thing I would add about that second round of engagement is it's really common to get great first round engagement, and I think we have a community and stakeholder engagement person in our office, and she says it's actually sometimes a good thing when in the second round, if people are really unhappy or they didn't think the process was going well, they show up at the second round of engagement and they tell you. So I think to put that into a bit of context, it's the way the trend goes. The first round has a great engagement, and we reach out to those people by email and invite them to the second round. If they don't come, I think it's partly due to the fact that they're feeling like it's going okay, but I think I agree with you. The 80% sort of consensus is really reassuring.
And is it possible to go back to the kind of the final?
Yeah.
I want my chance to point at the.
This one?
Yeah. that'd be great. No, I can reach, thanks. So my question with this option is that does keep the racket courts there
Yeah.
and usable.
Yeah.
And then my other question is, if in the short term, and when I say short term, I guess we're clearly talking 5 to 7 years, but if all we did was leave the existing gym the way it is with some improvements with lobby and all of that, if you needed to do performing arts further down the road, because the community finally agrees that we can't afford 800 seats or 1,000 seats, that could be done, and you'd have 2 gyms. You might find with 2 gyms, you'd have the gyms being used more than, and the performing arts couldn't work, but you don't have to necessarily do performing arts right away.
No, I think the part of the thinking on that, the moving ahead with recreation is it's just a lesser investment for something that you don't understand, you don't yet understand. So I think it was 1.5 to bring that back to a gym versus 5.5 to invest in performing arts. And if there's some time, I think you have the time to do the right process around the performing arts and whether it's the right fit or not. There's lots of time to do that.
So just listening to your answer comes up with a second question. You said 1.5 to have it as a gym.
I think that was the number.
Leaving it as the existing gym, but would that be the fixing of everything around it? Because it doesn't really need a lot to be a mediocre gym. It's already a mediocre gym.
Yeah, I think one of the key things was the assumption that the stage got removed in either scenario. And so there's a bit of demolition and removal to, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Lindgren.
Thanks. That's a great presentation, and I love that you did the pictures of what the boxes look like and then showed us what the inside of that would actually be like. I think any city would be thrilled to have a facility like this, so I'm happy to see that it's, something like this can go forward. My concern is about efficiencies on energy usage and whether or not we will have enough sort of progressive thinking on solar and passive solar water heating, and can we heat water through geothermal? Can we recapture some of the heat exchange to heat the building or the gyms or whatever else? And so it felt like you touched a bit on that, but has that been a big consideration?
I would say that it's the next phase of the work. When you make it into an architectural design and you go to kind of a schematic design, you're sort of you're really focusing on some of those bigger questions. But I would say, without question, from the aquatics perspective, new technology and efficiencies, there's huge improvements in extracting every bit of heat before you release it back into the air in terms of the air changes. We're actually going to tour some facilities in Scandinavia that have a new filtration system that hasn't been brought to North America yet, which uses a gravity-fed filtration system instead of forcing the water through using mechanics. So I think that there's not just technological advances, the building code and kind of public expectations around sustainability are really increasing and ramping up. So I think one of the only advantages about more time is that that some of those technologies might advance, but I'd say specifically for the pool, because it is such an energy intensive usage, there's always every pool we do, we've like turn the dial just a little bit more to try to make them as energy efficient as possible. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Lindgren. Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks so much for the presentation. I'll keep it brief. I've only been involved on the periphery of this. What I appreciate is the possibility thinking, and you were careful not to make assumptions about what you thought the community wanted. You actually heard right directly from them. And I'm the chair of the Cultural Master Plan Task Force, and I just want to say that your caution around the performing arts is very much appreciated. And while I agree with Chad that it might be a 1 in 40 year opportunity, we also have to understand that capacity better. And this gives us the flex to do that. So I'm very grateful. And I certainly appreciate the photos of actual facilities you've worked on so that we know like it's a real thing and it can totally happen.
Yeah, great. I'm glad.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any other questions or comments for Melissa? Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, I think in light of Councillor Wallace-Richmond's comments and my thought process all along, it was really neat for you to be able to show us near the start of this, okay, here's a 6-lane 25 meter, 8-lane 25, 10-lane 50 meter. In that same vein, we now know what it would cost to retrofit the existing gym to a better gym. We also know what it would cost to retrofit it to a 300 seat or thereabouts performing arts. I guess it wouldn't hurt for us to know what would a 600 seat, not on that site obviously, or 800 seat performing arts cost, just so that we can it's so easy to say that's what we want. Just like it's so easy to say we want 10 lanes of 50 meters. But when you start seeing the cost implications of that, and so I think it would be helpful for us to even just a ballpark figure, okay, to double that seating capacity, that's how much more it would be, or how much a new building, because then I think the community can provide the input that, you know what, a 300-seat retrofitted facility that can have the seating moved and the stage moved and be used for all of those things, maybe all that we want at this point, or can afford, or can make realistic. And I think part of that will happen in the cultural master plan review, but even having base numbers for that could be helpful.
I think it's a good idea. I guess what I would suggest is that if you're going up to 600 seat, it's kind of a whole different facility. So then you need to determine what 600 capacity theater are you pricing. So it's harder to do it from a unit rate perspective. I think it's possible, and perhaps it should be part of the master plan. And maybe it has to do with an operation, like a business case analysis around if you went up to 600, what kind of performances are you hosting? What is the focus? To be really clear, I'd say that the appeal of reusing this one is it's very much a multi-purpose community focus. It's not a high-end you can bring it up to the acoustic and the lighting and the flexibility and things, but it was originally designed as a community. The flexibility is part of the appeal, but I think when you get up to a bigger capacity, maybe you're talking about a different facility typology.
That's a fair, thank you for that answer, and Kevin, be quiet.
Councillor Cannon.
Thank you. And thank you again for your presentation. It's my second time hearing it today, and you've done a great job. I just wanted to reiterate, when we toured the one in Penticton, what we heard is that facility, when they built it, they shut down their pool and built, and it took 17 to 18 months. And what we heard was that was a bad decision that they did that, because their staffing, it upset their staffing, getting staffing back, and the public didn't have a pool for, the 17, 18 months. And I think that's what we're hearing with the options available, is that the public doesn't want the pool interrupted. They want the pool to use while a new build happens. So, and then I guess my other question from here is, I guess, where do we take it from here? Is it, if we decide, are we going forward with like actual schematics, like drawings? Like, where do we take it from here would be my question.
Do you want my suggestion on that? Yeah. I think what we're seeing a lot of municipalities do is take projects to the schematic design stage. So that's the next level where we bring in all the consultants. We look realistically at structural. We look at the sites. We would probably recommend a geotechnical analysis of especially where we're proposing to expand, to make sure the soil is okay. We would do the survey to figure out, does the topography work the way we think it's going to work? Look at potential other ways that we could look at the energy systems for the building. And then you have the opportunity to go from a Class D level costing, which is where we're at right now, which is basically off of unit square foot rates based on current facilities across Canada, or more across BC. And it just gives you a Class C costing. So it's just again, you're just refining everything down. And what we see quite often is that key decision makers just want that next level of understanding of the cost and the specifics. And we might find some road bumps along the way when we're doing SD that we just couldn't cover in the kind of level that we're at right now. So I think the next recommendation, and I do think, to be honest, you could still be a little bit flexible on that performing arts space. Like there could be, we could consider both of those different options and get them priced to that Class C at that stage as well. So you have another level of decision making around, and it buys a little bit more time to be informed by the cultural master plan as well. So I think you just take it a bit further.
So even looking possibly, 7 years plus out of this ever happening, is this too early to do?
I guess the question is, for you guys, you're probably looking at a funding cycle. So if you want to get a price that you can feel slightly more confident about, and you want to get ahead of that and then get that into your capital planning, I think you could do either. What I would say is that we've never seen things get less expensive as you wait, and I'm not saying that to sell it forward. It is just the reality that costs seem to every year they're going up a little bit. So
that was my thought too.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon. We may have a couple other questions, Melissa, but I'm wondering if staff could put up the proposed motion, and we'll see if we can get a seconder or mover, and then we can talk specifically to it. Can I have a mover and seconder for this motion? Thank you, Councillor Cannon, Councillor Eliason. And I'll have the administrator read the motion, please.
Moved by Councillor Cannon, seconded by Councillor Eliason, that council support in principle the Salmon Arm Recreation Campus redevelopment feasibility study prepared by HCMA Architecture and Design.
Okay, and speaking to the motion, Councillor Eliason.
Yeah, thanks. And so the motion is that we receive this presentation and the recommendations, but it doesn't, and it ties us to option B, which is the second option, but it doesn't tie us to the non-performing arts or the sports court for the existing auditorium, correct?
That's right, because the wording in the final report is waiting for the report from the Cultural Master Plan.
Okay, then I will support it. Thank you.
Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Worship. And I mean, this motion is asking us to support in principle the great work that's been done by your team. And I think even in a quick presentation that probably should have been 3 hours instead of half an hour, it's very easy to support what has gone into this, the public engagement, the input, and by supporting it in principle, clearly we're talking some big numbers here. There's lots of work to be done moving forward, but I think at this stage, what I've heard in the community, the involvement I've had, the work and communication I've had with staff, this and the tour of Penticton and other pools, being from the island, I've been to a number of the new ones in Comox and things like that, and this is what people want. It's just now figuring out how to finally design it and then what does it include, and I think you've given us a really good start, and I have no problem supporting it in principle at this point in time.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Do any other councillors like to speak to the motion? Okay, I'll just reserve my comments then. First of all, thank you very much, Melissa, and thank you, Aidan, for your work. This is about process, and I think that the process has been very inclusive, and people in the community have had an opportunity to put forward what their ideas are. And I think for us at this table, that's the most important piece. And I agree with Councillor Wallace-Richmond. You didn't assume. You listened to what people said and were flexible. By receiving this in principle, we still have a lot of flexibility. We've just got the blocks in place. And people say to me, like, why are you planning now for 2027? And I say, well, we started the Ross Street Underpass in 1982. So we have to start way in advance. And maybe we can move it up. But one of the main reasons is we just do not know when federal funding is going to come forward. And we cannot do this on our own. Our long-term financial plan says in 2027, if we receive the right grants, we could do this project without a tax increase. And that's why we picked that date. So a council closer to that date might say, hey, we're willing to go with the tax increase and we'll pull it back. But whatever happens, it will go to the public for their vote on whether they think it's a good project and whether they want the city to borrow the money. So we're just putting the building blocks in place, and we've got a Class E kind of concept here. We need to move that up to a Class C, because what happens when the federal government comes out with money, you got about 6 months. And you've got to be close to shovel ready or it goes right past you. A city in the South Okanagan received a grant for $6 million for a recreation facility, and they had to pass it by because they didn't have the things in place. So we do not want that to happen here. That's why we're planning so far in advance. The finished facility, when it's built, may not look exactly like the one we're looking at here, but it's going to have those blocks in place. And that's what we're trying to achieve. So I think we've done that. So I will certainly support the motion as well. Last opportunity for council if they wish to speak. I'll call the question and all those in favor. Passed unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I just want to reiterate it. It's been a pleasure to work with all of you and your community. So thanks for the time.
Thank you. Moving forward, first of all, welcome pickleball players. It's not inappropriate that you get to see the recreation plans. We do have one more presentation before we're talking about pickleball, but we will get to it probably in about 10 minutes, I think. So thank you very much, Lana, for backing your presentation off. Appreciate you doing that, and please come forward with your economic development report.
Great, thanks very much. And recognizing we're kind of late in the day, I hope to be 10 minutes or less is my big goal here. So just pleased to be here today to present our 2018 measurables report, perhaps a little delayed in the year as we move into 2019. So there's a few updates in this presentation as well for 2019 and progress we've been making so far. So I guess one of the big things today is just talking about some of the new initiatives or new programming that we have added to economic development over the last year or so. So with the addition of the MRDT and the Innovation Center, we've basically tripled our operations in the last year and a half time frame. So with that have come a lot of changes for our organization, changes to our home, our new location on Shuswap Street, change to our operating structure for sure, and changes to our staffing. So you'll see a quick glimpse of some of those things in the presentation today. So just taking a look at BRE and community support first, Coffee with Council initiative continues to remain a priority for us. We keep getting good reports on that from both Businesses Council and our board. So in 2018, we hosted 9 Coffee with Council sessions. We also hosted our 3rd tech meetup event in partnership with the school district, and this is an event at Sullivan High School each year, and it's designed to ignite interest in tech as a career opportunity for our emerging workforce, our grade 9, 10, 11, 12 students, and actually in some cases younger than that. Students in that half-day event, we had about 900 students come through, and they were exposed to about 20 to 25, different trade show booths for different high-tech companies operating in our community, as well as post-secondary institutions. So it's a good initiative, really exciting day, and we'll continue with that going forward. In 2018 and continuing on, EDS staff have been participating as active members of the Housing Task Force Committee at the City of Salmon Arm, as well as the Cultural Master Plan Committee. We also took a strong position of support for the Ross Street Underpass project, and both staff and our board worked actively to share valid, accurate information to the community about that initiative, and we're pleased to see obviously that progressing. The Mechatronics business case was a contract that we undertook with the Okanagan College in 2018, and it was an interesting opportunity for a revenue generation for our organization, which resulted in the business case being prepared for Salmon Arm campus to take a look at implementing a 2-year diploma program for mechatronics, really supporting the development of tech workforce in our community. So looking forward to Launchpreneur is another project that's been a multi-year program for our organization, started in 2018, finished up in spring of 2019. This was season 5 for Shuswap Launchpreneur. Again, this is a partnership initiative. I think Council's pretty familiar with this, but it's a partnership with Community Future Shuswap, Okanagan College, and Actus and our organization. To date, there's been over 80 teams or individuals that have gone through this 3-month program, resulting in 44 businesses operating in our community today, employing just shy of 80 full-time equivalent positions. So that doesn't include the season 5 participants, which we'll continue to monitor and add those measurables to this program over time. But in season 5, we saw 26 participants in the program, 13 of which moved forward to compete in the final night. Salmon Arm Branding Project, very familiar with this one as well. This project actually started in late 2017 and included EDS partnering with 11 different community organizations, of which the City of Salmon Arm was one. It was a process to work towards a collaborative brand development and a community marketing strategy for Salmon Arm, and it consisted of about a year-long process of data collection, data analysis, and community input. All of those information sources funneled into the situational analysis for our community, which really drew out our competitive advantages, which were identified as safety, our natural beauty, ease of commute, good schools, affordable housing, and most importantly, and really what formed the common thread leading us towards the small city big ideas, was our competitive advantage in the categories of prosperity and innovation. So since the brand launch, we have been working on implementing the marketing strat. We are most of the way through the official mark process, which is a process to secure or protect that brand when we're going forward, and we obviously thank the City of Salmon Arm for taking a leadership role in that process. We've also hired a marketing coordinator, Morgan Matheson, who's just joined us recently, and she will be overseeing the implementation of a lot of the work of the community marketing strat. That'll include things like updating all of our in-house publications, including our Salmon Arm Living Guide, our community profile, and others, complete rebrand of those. They're going to print actually quite shortly. Complete refresh and update of the SAID's website to incorporate that new brand. One of the few print advertisements that we targeted within the marketing strat was the Invest BC ad. I'll talk a little bit about that one in a few moments. But most of our efforts through 2019 and 2020 will really focus on digital media. So we will be launching a digital media campaign focused on both resident attraction and business attraction this year. Also looking at increasing our in-community presence of the brand. This includes opportunities like the brand story that will go out in the reusable bag distribution in partnership with the city, as well as our Trans-Canada Highway banners, which this is just a mock-up of those. We hope to have those installed before May Long Weekend, so as early as this week, through the Trans-Canada corridor, just in the downtown corridor area. So this is just a quick glance at the Invest BC ad. This is a partnership project with with Shoe Shop Economic Development, and it includes both a one-page advertisement and a one-page editorial. This magazine in particular was one of the few that we targeted for print, again, really focusing on that digital media, but the distribution for it is very targeted to where we want to reach. So this magazine is going to print in May. It's an annual publication and will be distributed to over 16,000 BC business subscribers, as well as over 100 site selectors in both the United States and Canada. It goes out through all BC trade and investment offices, as well as Canadian consulates, Premier's office, and relevant ministries, as well as major real estate brokers. So at the bottom of this layout, you'll see the leaderboard, which is a digital ad that it will be positioned on the BC Business website that links right through to the EDS website. Two other quick pieces that I just wanted to mention in terms of marketing. We've recently received some positive provincial exposure for the Innovation Centre project. The first is a publication that will be coming out shortly, posted on the Province of BC's Ideas Exchange website, meant to highlight best practices in terms of economic development in communities. And the other is on the BC Economic Development Association Economic Development in Action Best Practice website as well. So both of those will be highlighting the Salmon Arm Renovation Centre quite shortly. So switching gears now to the Innovation Centre project. It was kind of fun. Some of you have seen these pictures already through our AGM, but it was kind of fun looking back at some of the images of sort of how this building has transitioned in the last year. So I just wanted to share some of those with council. So certainly before and after exterior pictures and kind of the vibrancy that this new building is lending to Shoe Shop Street now. Our boardroom, believe it or not, we did hold a couple of board meetings in that renovation state there before it's now in its much nicer state. Our hot desk space, and of course the new Small City Big Ideas brand being front and center in that space. And then I think this one is a really interesting piece to show as well, because this is the, of course, right at the front door, the Innovation Centre and the butterfly plaques that really highlight the community involvement and community sponsorship that went into making this project a reality for our community. And when I talk about the we that undertook these renovations, of course, I don't mean me in any of that. Building owner Bill deserves all the credit and the commitment and investment that went into making that building what it is today, for sure. So a quick summary of that. Over the last year, we secured the location, we relocated our offices, completed the renovations, and had our first tenant join us in May. At the end of 2018, we were 60% full in terms of our co-working space. Currently, we're 80% full, and we had a couple more tours today, so I really do see us being 100% occupied by the end of this year. Looking specifically at the Makerspace, a lot of 2018 work consisted of partnerships. So that included partnerships with industry, partnerships with School District 83, and of course, partnership with the city to allow us to purchase the equipment needed to complete the layout and final setup of the Makerspace. We brought on our executive director, Thomas Brigginshaw, in November of 2018 and had our official grand opening in December. Since launching the space, we've had over 200 people through the Makerspace participating in workshops, everyone from youth to seniors, inventors to hobbyists, really focusing on diverse workshop experiences from woodshop to robotics and coding. So we're really pleased with the uptake on that as well. So I'm back in 2 weeks to present the MRDT 2018 annual report, which is a requirement that has to go to council first and then on to the province. So I'm going to zoom through this really quickly so I'm not redundant in a couple weeks' time when I'm back here again. But touching quickly, and of course this important initiative, the MRDT program, event funding support this year, we supported 5 community groups to the tune of about $12,000, really focusing on shoulder and off-season events only. Jennifer Strachan, our event coordinator, was able to support an additional 6 community groups for event hosting support in the Shuswap. Shuswap Trail Alliance projects were strongly supported, as were Shuswap tourism projects, and important to note, all support for those 2 organizations was incremental to what they would have been able to do with their existing budgets, so over and above what they had planned for the year already. We also completed our community event strategy, which will really position us well for future bid opportunities and future event hosting in our community. So looking at this year, 2019 projects, we're really focusing on directional signage with the new Salmon Arm brand, directional signage to key tourism assets in our community, as well as canoe beach beautification focused on the entrance and signage as well there, and then 3 visitor kiosks, which we plan to install over the summer months, providing key visitor information in places where tourists naturally gather. Those 3 items will also be on next council meeting agenda for council's further consideration and hopeful approval, so I won't go into detail on those either. Event planning website is going to be launching towards the end of the summer, providing all the logistical information for event planning in our community. Image bank project will be undertaken over the next few months as well, and we're also just moving forward with finalizing and completing the orders for our community welcome packages. So these will be event attendee welcome packages. It'll be nice to have a collaborative brand that all of our community organizations can help to circulate. The only other thing I touch on for MRDT at this point is just a quick update on the bid submission for the Junior A National Cup bid. That did go in on April 30th. Big beast of a document, about 135 pages, talking about all of the great things in our community and how well positioned we are to host this event in Salmon Arm, and we're patiently waiting for an update on that, so we'll keep you posted on that too. Top 10 big ideas for 2019, almost done. This came from our strategic planning session, so the board identified some key priorities for us moving forward into 2019, which include the Entrepreneur Program, which we've successfully completed, our marketing contract position, again underway, food hub feasibility study. I know council addressed the memo we had on the agenda earlier today, and I appreciate your support for that as well. That's really an important piece for our community, and I see that project moving forward in the very same way that the Innovation Center project did, looking at a collaborative, multi-use, shared resource space. In the first case for tech, this one will be really focused around agriculture and agri-food development, so huge opportunity for our community there. Accelerator program, partnership program with Okanagan College, we look to have Andrew Klingel hopefully back in the center in September for the next year, providing free business accelerator programming for our community. Industrial Park Lunch and Learns, we'll be hosting another one in June and onward from there. We'll be taking a complete redo of our EDS website over the summer months, taking a look at our AcDev strategy redo this year as well. Looking to organize some workforce attraction roundtable discussion groups, really focused on talent attraction in our community. Digital media marketing, I touched on earlier, a big focus of our work in 2019. And then the final one is a PMP Entrepreneur Immigration Pilot Program, and council may recall we brought this forward to you a few months ago, and I would just give you a quick update on that our community listing will be going live this week on the Provincial website, and we've been hearing some really exciting things from other communities in terms of uptake and numbers, almost concerning in terms of volume and what that means to EDS capacity. So we look forward to reporting back to you on some of the measurables from that program as well in terms of new business starts focused on immigration. So that's a really quick snapshot of our last year and kind of what we've been doing over the last few months. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Lana. Really appreciate that. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Worship. And as the city rep on the DSA board, it's my pleasure to work with Lana on a regular basis. And I can't remember exactly what our investment is in EDS, but boy, do we ever need a value for money audit. Not. Thank you for all you do. It's amazing the money that, the value we get from the money, and with limited money and limited human capital, your volunteer board and your team and you provide us with an amazing return on our investment. And I think as much as I know one of your board members, your chair, doesn't want us to recognize him, I'm going to anyway. And I think every community needs a Lana Fit, and every community needs a Bill Laird. And thank you, Mr. Laird, for what you've done. I don't think people recognize that the Innovation Center could not have happened without a creative landlord who cares about this community as much as everybody else or as anybody else. So all I can say is it's a pleasure to represent the EDS at this table and to be part of that board, and thank you and Bill for all you do. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks, Councillor Flynn, for being the liaison with council. Any other councillors wish to comment or ask any questions? Thank you very much, Lana. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, we're moving on to our last item of the daytime session. So welcome to those interested in pickleball and pickleball players. We have a youth council in front of you who have been here since 2:30, and so it's great to have these young people here involved as well. So council, this is under item 18.1, and I think we have Darby Boyd is here, and I believe Ernie, or there'll be one representative from the pickleball group who will speak on their behalf. So if you both want to come forward at the same time, that would be fantastic. So just so people in the audience know, this isn't an opportunity for everybody to speak today because it's 5:30, but we are always open to your individual input at any time. But please come forward, Ernie and Darby.
Thank you. So through your worship, as I've sent a letter that sort of outlined a proposed agreement between the club and the society for the use of the courts for this year. I won't go into the detail at this point, or I suppose I can list it out. But
Darby, would you just speak right into that mic, because I don't
Sure.
know if the people behind you can hear you.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you.
I will actually go through some of the details, and then we can speak to some of the issues. We've set the annual playing fees at $25 per player. Last year that was $50. I'll go through all the rest of them here. We provided exclusive playing rights from 9 till noon, Monday to Friday, and from 5 p.m. till dusk for those same days, Monday to Friday. And that's from May 1st to September 30th inclusive. And that's on 3 of 6 courts. Now, I'll come back to that in just a minute. The club was, when we first spoke of it, the intention was to make sure there's one empty court at all times. And so the idea there would have been that as the first court would be left empty, if the players were there and there was more than necessary, they could utilize the other 2 courts. As soon as the empty court filled, they would back off another court, and so on, until they were down to their 3. So we'd be making the most efficient use of those 6 courts as possible at all times, by still giving the perception that there was an open court for the public at all times. Now, the club, as part of their what we've conceded to them is we put a storage container on site, and the club, just to understand that they keep various equipment, they keep the courts clean, they blow them off, they sort of get them ready for play each night, and that's what they use the storage container for. And then they would also be given 1 tournament weekend a year, and we would provide 1 free room rental at the Saskia Rec Center for their club meeting, annual AGM. Now, unfortunately, that was a proposal that Ernie and I had sort of worked through, and it's my understanding that when that went to their full club membership, that they discussed that, and they also discussed their programming needs. And it's my understanding that the club doesn't feel like they can meet all of their programming needs with those times and days as it stands. So I think Ernie might speak to some of that. I did encourage him to speak to some of the dilemmas that they're faced with out there, and why it's a problem for the club with the times that are available. So maybe I'll let Ernie speak to that. The last thing I will say is it's been a very good working with Ernie, and there's lots of positives that come from the club in terms of, like say, maintaining the courts and organizing play for local people. So, but that said, I'll let Ernie speak to the times.
Great, thank you, Darby, and welcome, Ernie. Welcome to council.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and giving us your perspective.
Okay, the proposal that Darby and I worked on, last year we had it where we played Monday, Wednesday, Friday days, 8 till noon, and then we played Tuesday, Thursday, 5 till dusk. And this year's proposal, we asked for Monday to Friday, 8 till noon, and Monday to Friday, 5 till dusk. And obviously there's been a lot of complaints about us hogging the courts, as the phrase goes. What our issues are, I guess, is currently we have a membership. Last year we ended at 70 members. Now, to try to fit 70 members into the proposed 3 courts when you can only do 12 max at a time. So we're talking an average game, half an hour, where you're talking hours to wait your turn to get in with only 3 courts. So the other issue is the city's requesting us to pay $25 per member to have those 3 courts, exclusive rights. Our issue is our members have come back and said, why would we pay $25 for 3 courts when we can walk over and play on the other 3 courts at the same time, actually longer times, for nothing? And how do you argue with that? I haven't got an answer for that. Like, it's either $25 for 3 courts restricted time or nothing for the other 3 courts. So our members are saying that is not enough hours or days or however we want to work it out.
Okay, thank you very much for presenting that perspective as well. I'll just see if councillors have any questions around what we've heard so far. Councillor, do you have any questions for either presenter at this time? Councillor Lavery?
I have quite a few questions actually, but I'm not sure what the next step in the process is. So is this the time for questions and comments?
This would be the time.
Okay, so it's really, I guess, pretty important to me that we have clarity and consistency. And I have to say, and it's a reactive moment in the last week or so, the evidence to me was there wasn't clarity and consistency, and I'm not criticizing anybody about here, but it's certainly been a bit of a brouhaha, and I think it's important for the club to know that we do get contacted by the public about some of these things as well, including it. So I guess my questions, Your Worship, and then I'll save my comments for later. Really, I want to drill down on clarity and consistency. With the primary recognition that these are public courts. And public, in my view, I'm one of 7 up here, public access trumps the needs of particular clubs. So I'm going to be really careful here. So can you comment, Ernie, on, I've heard, and it's third party, so this is the time for clarity, that some club members have said, well, regardless of the agreement, we'll play on the courts anyhow.
Well, I guess what our members are saying is technically if we decide to disband as a club and there are 70 members, then we have the option. We are now the public. So what we're saying is, okay, we got the 6 courts to play, so we'll just go out there and play whenever we can play. Okay. We're no different than anybody else. We're the publics.
No, I agree with that.
We'll just have conversation through the chair just to make it clear.
Yeah, sorry. And so just again for baseline of information, and this does not influence my position on this at all. How many club members are from Salmon Arm and how many are from the regional area?
Off the top of my head, I can't tell you that right now, but it's probably 80%, I'll say, are Salmon Arm people, and surrounding areas, obviously. Sorrento, Blind Bay, they all kind of come in and play. We have, believe it or not, we have probably maybe 15, 20 members that come from Alberta for the summer, and they play as well.
So when you say 70 to 80% from Salmon Arm, are you saying 70, 80% from Salmon Arm and area?
Yes.
Okay, how many just from Salmon Arm roughly?
I don't know that off the top
Half?
of my head. Oh, I'd say greater than
Greater
that.
than half, okay, thanks. And I did indicate through Darby in an email a little while ago, I certainly heard stories last year of public being charged $5 to play. Can you tell me a bit more about that and what your thoughts about going forward are, regardless of wherever we end up?
What we had an issue with last year was we paid last year, correct me if I'm wrong, Darby, $50 to the city, and we paid $35 to our club to keep our club going. So it was an $85 membership. We had a lot of people that wanted to come out and play with our group because of different skill levels, but they didn't want to pay to become a member. So now then the issue becomes, do you let these people play with you? And yes, we're trying to be inclusive to everybody. So there has to be some way why is it fair for somebody to pay $85 and another person to pay nothing and still play with the same group? So our thought was we got a hold of other clubs throughout the valley. I talked to Osuyas, Oliver, Penticton, all that kind of thing, and they all charge $5 if you drop in. So what we did was, if you drop in the first time, it's free. If you drop in the second time, it's $5. If you played more than 3 times, then we'd put that $15 towards your yearly membership if you decide to join.
Okay, thank you for that. I've 2 or 3 more questions, Your Worship. I can keep on going. So, so in some way, then there was a valuation of $20 for a double set. I know you're talking about individuals dropping in. I guess what I'm trying to say, you know, I'm going to be looking at a number of things, and one is the overall fee as well. So at $25, that would be about 5 sets a club member would pay over the course of a season, given a $5 valuation to play.
You're confusing me.
Okay. I'll come back to that. Could you walk me through what happens, either last year or whatever we end up with here now, when I or a member of the public comes up and the courts are all full? What happens?
What we have is we have what we refer to as a whiteboard, and on the whiteboard you have 3 different levels. So we have a black, a red, and a green. If you're a red, for instance, you're an advanced player. If you're black, you're an intermediate player. If you're green, you're a beginner, or you need lessons or help from us. So you go up there and there's a bunch of squares on the board and you sign your name on the board. As soon as the 4, it takes 4 to play a game, so as soon as there's 4 names on there, the next 4 go out then and play the game. And as soon as their game's over anywhere in the court, they come off and the next 4 go up. Okay. So it just keeps rotating through.
So I'm going to go to the hypothetical or whatever the new agreement is going to be. One of the things that was said was we'll keep 1 court available for the public and we want to do the other 5 courts. If it is 3 or 4 courts that the final decision is, and all 5 or 6 courts are taken up by the club because they're saying, well, why should we pay? We'll just go out and play. What is I know in tennis, as a member of the public, if I want to go and be the next on the court, I sit in front of the court or put my tennis racket in front of the court. What is the proposal from the pickleball club now for whatever amount of courts would be designated public use? What is the procedure for fair public access about a wait list, other than a whiteboard that the club might put up?
Are you talking for members or for anybody dropping in?
Me as a member of the public.
If I'm understanding you correctly, if you're going to be a member, you would play on just the 3 courts that we have access to. If you are not a member of the club, then you would play on the other 3 courts, and it's up to that group, however they arrange themselves, because the way I see it, we are not there to police the other 3 courts. All we're interested in is our own 3 courts. How are we going to control that and keep people rotating through? How the public, I'll call it the other public courts, how they decide to designate themselves would be no different than you showing up right now.
Yeah, fair enough. So I'll try to be perhaps a little more clear in my questions. I've heard, as a representative of the club, saying, if we don't get the agreement that we want, well, let's go out and we'll play in all the courts. So I'm asking, if that is one of the avenues that happens, how, if I'm a member of the club, a member of the public, and the 6 courts are taken up, what is the procedure because I know what it's in tennis, in pickleball, what is the procedure to be next on the wait list to play next on that court?
Currently, the city paid for paddle holders out there. So I guess you just put your paddle in the holder, and when it comes up, it's your turn next.
Okay. And is there a potential scenario where if I go to play and they're on a public court and there are other paddle holders from the club already in place to play on the public court? Help me out through that.
I think our intent was to try to separate it so you wouldn't get into that.
Okay. So again, to be clear, to separate then whatever the agreement of the pickleball club would be about how many user agreement courts are rented, that's all you would play on.
Correct.
Okay. And any spillover from club members who are seeing, I get the problem, who are seeing vacant public courts right next to them, and they start playing on them as public. If a member of the public came up, would they immediately stop the game and get off?
Probably not. Would you in tennis?
No, I wouldn't.
No. I think you would finish your game, and then when the court became available, the next group comes on.
The next group being?
Whoever. If one person shows up by themselves and they ideally want to play with our group, well, then we'd have to say, sorry, you play with the public group. Like, how do you let somebody show up and want to play for nothing with the members who have all paid?
I appreciate that, and Your Worship, I just have 1 or 2 last questions on this to drill down a bit more. So, would there be a scenario that myself and 3 of my closest friends show up to play pickleball? The 3 club courts are being used by club members. The 3 public courts are being used by club members. We say, okay, we want to play here, perfectly agree, finish the game off. Am I going to be presented with a scenario, well, hold on, no, there's a wait list for this already from some other people?
No.
Okay.
No. No, our intent, Darby and I agreed, our intent is if we leave 1 court available, obviously there'll be a time frame where you're finishing a game and it might not be any look like they're available, but as soon as somebody's standing in line, if they have a foursome of their own, yes, that's the public court.
Okay. And the other 2 courts, again, it depends on the agreement, but the other 2 courts, if they are public courts as well, the same rules and stance of the club will apply, that if there are 2 or 3 public courts available, that it'll be fair share, fair come?
That would be the intent.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Worship. And I want to make it really clear, at some points in time I have played a lot of pickleball, gone to tournaments, I've used the courts there, I've gone to the community center with the club and played there. I haven't for a while, but pardon my bluntness, this is a first world problem, and I am extremely frustrated that we're spending this much time trying to figure out how to use what is a public facility that has access for the whole public. And I'm shocked that anybody's complaining about $25 for unlimited, this much time through a whole summer, and they're actually willing to say, whoa, if they get to use it for free, why do I have to pay $25 for a whole year? I'd hate to work that out per hour as to what people are paying, but it might be a quarter, or it might be 5 cents or a penny. So I'm frustrated because I think what Darby came up with, and you came up with, and I appreciate you guys working that hard to take back to your club, was fair, reasonable, and ridiculously inexpensive for your members. So if I'm wrong there, I'd love to hear the general public tell me that I'm wrong, because I play pickleball and I pay to play $4 or $5 drop in at the community center with the clubs, which is probably the same club, and that's per time I drop in to use the gym. I am a member at the golf course. I pay almost $2,000 a year to play at the golf course. If you go use the arena or the pool, you pay $5 or $6 to drop in to use the pool. You pay more than that for the arena. The one year I played a lot of pickleball, I paid $150 or something to join the private courts out at Canoe. You're asking us to reserve times for 70 people for $1 a drop-in, 20 cents a drop-in? Let's be reasonable. I'm sorry, but Tim was being very nice and asking a lot of questions. I know how it works when you show up and play at the community center. You get on the board, you get crossed off, you go join the court. I understand how that works. To me, to have people think that a drop-in should have to pay the club to use the same courts that are there for free use for others, the club is asking us to reserve times. I think the best solution maybe is to just say, we can't reserve these. You don't pay the whopping fee of $25, and when people drop in and you're using 5 courts, they get to go on next. I think your group's being unreasonable. I think you were being reasonable with Darby. I have no problem telling your 70 members that they're being unreasonable for $25. I'm not in support of any of this based on, I was sort of in support of the proposal until I got told $25 is too much and why would I pay anything when I can just use a court that's free? Because you're asking to reserve it, you're asking to restrict public use. That's why you're paying $25. Squash court is $10 per person for 45 minutes. Let's be reasonable here. I think you and Darby did a great job. I think your club is being wrong in asking us to change it. If you don't want to pay anything, we won't reserve any times. It's that simple in my mind. And I think that's where Tim was getting. It's a public facility. I'm not going to be as nice as he was. I've played lots of pickleball. I stopped playing because it seems like such a closed group. And I think you're exemplifying that by the way you're treating people that drop in. So, sorry, but wow.
Well, if we use the same analogy, you think the $25 is very cheap, then we look at it the other way around. Why don't the people join our club and we could have a bigger group for $25? It's cheap.
I'm not here to promote your club.
Councillor Wallace Richmond, you have your button pressed.
Thanks, Your Worship. I think it's important to state that we're not actually talking about pickleball. We're talking about exclusivity of use, and we're trying to put a number on that. What is that value to have exclusive use? And when you're in a building, the value of exclusive use is far greater. If you want an hour of ice, you will pay for that. Or you will wait for public skating. If you want the whole swimming pool to yourself, you will pay for that. Or you will wait for public swim night. So, but you can't, to my mind at least, with respect through you, Your Worship, you can't have it both ways. You can't say I want the exclusivity, but I'm not prepared to see the real exchange of value there. So either it's always public swim time at the whatever it's called. That's how often I play, or it isn't. So let's just be clear though, these courts belong to everybody. It's a public asset, and we're talking about what is the price of exclusivity. And so that's something that your group, to my mind, really needs to get their head around, rather than come to us and have us make the decision, because those courts belong to everyone.
I understand that. Is it not the same principle that you do with the soccer or the baseball or the slow pitch? Do they not book exclusive days and times so they can go out and play? Like a Little League, they book and they give days and times. We're just basically trying to do the same analogy. We just want days and times and that we can get our members through. We're willing to pay for that. We're just asking, what's the best approach for the city and us? Because I know there's lots of complaints, and we hear lots of complaints, and we always say, come and join us. If you got a problem, tell us what's going on. But that's all we're trying to do.
Thank you. Councillor Eliason. Is your button, or is?
Ready to go again.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, for a kid to play soccer, it's $60. For a 6 to 9 year old, it's $90. For a 15 to 18-year-old, it's $125, and that's early discount. If you register on time, sort of the same thing that you're talking about, it's $165 for a kid to play on a grass field. And those times are booked. $25, that's a really good deal for exclusivity. The other option, wide open public, right? There are private options available. I didn't feel comfortable adding the extra pickleball courts because we were competing with a public business that was offering pickleball courts. You know, $1,600 a year is our estimated revenue. Doing the math, that doesn't buy a pickleball court a year. Doesn't pay for the painting, doesn't pay for the asphalt, it doesn't pay for the nets, it doesn't do any of that stuff. I think it's an exceptional deal. And I don't disagree with, you know, the talk about exclusivity. Do you want to rent it? Yeah, you can rent the ice. Do you want to rent the soccer field? Yeah, you can rent the soccer field. Do you want to rent it for a tournament? Sure, rent it for a tournament, right? There's a tennis club that runs and has their own courts for their own thing, and they do their own fundraising for their own events. There's some public ones available. Are they up to the same standard? Maybe not, but it's really, really opened my eyes to the conversation. Do we lock them up? Do we open them up? What do we do? But I think that everybody has to get along here, and I am concerned about the public access to those courts. So I won't be supporting a $25 per player fee for Salmon Recreation. I think that's not even close to where it needs to be.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Eliason. Do any other councillors want to comment or ask questions? Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. And I guess it's a process question of are we making a motion here, or are we going to give suggested direction to Darby? So I guess I'd like some clarification on that. I'm more in the clarification to the rec center, so to try to work something out, and then if something can't come on back to us, but I'm just, it's a process question.
Sure. Oh, appreciate that. First of all, Ernie, I didn't mean to bring you here to, to hear people express themselves in a frustrated or annoying way. But I knew that was going to happen, and I thought it was necessary for this process. So if we dial way back, last year, as you had mentioned, Monday, Wednesday, Friday in the morning, I think Tuesday and Thursday in the afternoon, the pickleball group had exclusivity to the courts. And the way that came about was members of the public would go to Klahani, and at no fault of the pickleball members, they would be playing on all 6 courts. And they might come along with 3 of their friends and have 4, but felt intimidated to get onto the court. And so we thought to ourselves, okay, how can we solve this problem? Well, we could solve the problem by saying, okay, pickleball people, you have it this time, and the public, it could be open at this time. And so that's what happened last year. 2 sort of complaints I heard. One was the fee, the $50 fee plus the $35 to the Pickleball BC. And I didn't hear that from very many people, actually. And I don't think that we should generalize when we talk about the pickleball club, because I know not all members of the pickleball club feel the same way. So, for instance, my wife paid her $85, and she was only able to get out 5 or 6 times, but that was okay. She wanted to play with other people. But the problem became, the second problem was when members of the public went to play at those times, of course they couldn't, because it was pickleball time. So I had this great idea, and Darby and I talked a little bit about it, about how about, okay, the pickleball people the club will give way more time, twice as amount of time, and we'll cut the price in half, but we'll give them half the courts. That way they'll be able to schedule 4.5s at this time, and 4s at this time, and 3s at this time. It appears that great idea was not so great, because here we are. But I think it's okay that we're all here in one room, and, you know, you're letting us know what your opinion is, and we're providing ours to you. It is clear, I think, from this council that there needs to be an opportunity for the public to play at all times. And if I show up with 7 of my friends and want to play on 2 courts, and it's a public court, then there should be an expectation that I can play. And I think that's where the 3 and 3 came. I had hoped we were going to build 2 more courts this year on the other side of the fence, and maybe we will next year, and maybe this is only this year's problem, because they'll be physically separated from the ones that are there already. So, in answer, Councillor Lavery, to your question, here is what I suggest, and I'll take feedback from Ernie, from Darby. I suggest that our Recreation Society representative, which is Councillor Cannon, I suggest that she and Darby and Ernie get together, and we need a representative of the public there, an elected person, who would be Councillor Cannon, who has told me that she'd be willing to do this, that they get together and come back with a recommendation to council in 2 weeks. Because it's clear that we're not going to solve the problem here, and this is not the place to negotiate. But it is a good way to get to know what each other's thinking. So that would be my suggestion, and I would listen to any councillor who wants to comment on that suggestion. Councillor Flynn, is your comment on that suggestion?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
My comment is the letter that was presented to us in our package would have worked for me, except I would have wanted the club will ensure that there will be 1 empty court available at all times to ensure public access. So that means the club could use 5 courts. All I felt, they don't have 5 reserved, they have 3 reserved. 5 could be used if the public isn't there. All I felt is it had to be worded that if the public shows up, they have to finish the game. The club people have to finish the game they're playing if that court is needed. To me, this would have worked, and I thought $25 was way too little. That's my only comments, but I think this should have worked. I can't believe that it's not agreed to, but I have no problem with the process you're recommending, because clearly I'm just getting frustrated.
And I'm sure Councillor Cannon would send out something to council after we've all had a breath, you know, to give our kind of thoughts. Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thanks, Your Worship, and I agree with the process as well. I want to put some dibs in, at least I'm one position, 1 person and 7 here. I'm open to the proposal that is in the letter, and to the hours as well. Those are prime hours, Monday to Friday, without a doubt. My own perspective, and again, I have faith in the consultation process, is that the fees should stay at $50, and that we use a portion of those fees to put up very clear signs about public and public access on the public courts. And I look forward to the agreements that come back to our table.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Councillor Eliason?
Yeah, the exclusivity is important. And it's normal for a public facility to cost less than a private facility, but it's not normal for a public facility to cost astronomically way less than a public facility. And I think that having clear signage and open courts for the public, because if you drive up to somewhere and you see people up and rackets up and people playing, and you're new, you're never going to get on. Right? And I appreciate the club organizing everything, but when it costs $150 to put your kid in soccer, or $500 to put him in hockey, or $200 to put him in baseball, and you're paying about $25 to get brand new courts for exclusive for the key hours when people are free, like 5 to dusk is when people are off work. That's the public time. Like, when are you going to go play pickleball? After you're done work. Right? So it's really hard for me to support any, like, especially Monday to Friday every day. If they're going to be fully booked, love to see them get used, but we need to keep space for our public. So I'll relay my concerns to Councillor Cannon for those meetings.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for pressing your button, Councillor Cannon. Are you willing to do this?
Yes. Well, I had it pressed earlier and then I unpressed it. Because I could feel the heat. I'm fine to take this on. I mean, just looking at it for me, the exclusivity is the big thing, and I think $25 personally is way too cheap. And if you want to do a tournament, I mean, people come to tournaments, pay a fee, and that should have a cost attached to it too. So just let you know where I'm thinking, and I look forward to getting together and working through this.
Ernie, how you feeling about this? Are you willing to give us a go?
Yeah. No.
Okay, really appreciate it. Appreciate your calmness. Darby, if you're willing to be a part of this? Okay, so, you can talk to your people, and I'm sure Councillor Cannon will talk to council, and then get together in 2 weeks from now. We'll come up with some type of proposal, and maybe this isn't going to work. I don't know what you'll come up with, but I do appreciate you coming and talking to us. And thank you, Darby, as well, and thank you to the pickleball players who were here. We appreciate you coming. Okay. We have a question and answer period. Does anyone have a question out there? Seeing none, we will recess until 7 o'clock.